Hi everyone, welcome to Mel's Carving Club. I'm so excited for you guys to be here for our first ever Mel's Carving Club tutorial. This month we are going to be making our loop spoon, which as you can see here is what we're going to be receiving in the mail. In each box you're going to be receiving a blank, and if you are beginner, basswood, and this one is for advanced, so it is made out of butternut. You will also be getting a paper bag with your sandpaper and also Band-Aid, wood butter, as well as a pencil, which I thought I put in there, but it isn't. But you should get one in your box. Inside of my toolbox, these are the tools that we're going to be using for this project today. And we're going to start off with a gouge, which this one is a 12mm spoon gouge, as well as a carving knife. And I have our Japanese carving knives, and I am right-handed, as well as a detail saw, as you can see here, and that is a help cut the loop part of our spoon, and a Shinto rasp, and this will help us with the end grain of making that a little bit smoother. So these are all the things that you'll be needing. You are now on your journey of carving, so you'll need a toolbox or somewhere to safely carve all of your pieces. The last thing we'll be needing is a bench hook so you can safely carve your pieces. Using your pencils, we want to make a circle that's going to be the outline of your spoon, and this is just going to help guide us to make sure that we can carve as evenly as we possibly can. So with our gouge, we're going to start in the middle and then work our way to the line that we just drew. And as you can see where my hand is, I like to get a little more leverage. So the base of my palm is on the back, but then eventually I slowly move my hand towards the middle when I want a little bit more control. My hand is always away from the tool, and I slowly carve. This is in real time, but as you can see, I speed up the video so you guys don't have to watch me carving all day long. But I let the tool do the work. The tool itself is shaped like a U, and so it will slowly be able to pick up the material as we're carving. But this is an incredibly slow process. It's very meditative, and it is really easy to get lost in it. The one thing I want to make sure that you guys understand is to always be moving your hand so that your tool is not facing you, in that way that you're always being as safe as possible. Right now I want to make sure that my hand is, as you can see, flat on the board, and so it is being able to hold it. There's a little notch at the top of your bench hook, as you can see here, and that's what's able to stabilize my piece. So I am making sure that my hand, where I'm holding the tool, is really securely holding it, and my hand on my left hand here is pushing down my blank. You don't want the blank to move. That's kind of the goal of you know, as we're carving, is you want one hand to be pushing the tool and the other hand to be securing your blank so it's stable. But I'm working my way all the way to the line, and as you reach inside the wood, it's going to be a lot softer. You're going to realize that. And we're using wood that is kiln dried, so it's not wet, which makes it a little bit harder to carve, but the great part about that is that you can immediately use it afterwards. Like I mentioned, this is a sped up video, so this is a lot faster than if you were doing this by hand, so just keep that in mind. So eventually what I'm trying to do is even out all the walls of my spoon bowl, and I'm obviously not trying to go too deep because I don't want to go all the way through, although with the tool itself I don't think that's actually possible, especially if I want it to have an even bowl. If you want an even deeper bowl, I suggest grabbing maybe the bowl carving gouge, and you can even make this deeper, because with the spoon gouge you can only go so far, and that's based on the actual radius of the gouge itself. I also like to sweep away anything that is obstructing the board because I like it to be flat, just in case it wobbles or anything like that. This should take you probably about an hour to an hour and a half, depending on which wood you have and your level of expertise. I do want to point out that this project is a pretty intermediate project, I'm not gonna lie. Really proud of us to be starting off with this one. It is a really fun project, and obviously we have a few months to finish it, but this is the finished bowl. I wanted to show you guys what it looked like. So now we're going to be moving on to actually sawing out the inside part of our handle, and first I want to draw it out, and I found the middle of the hole, which is a 1/2 inch, so I measured that out, and then I wanted the total to be 4 inches, so I went above it to 3 inches, and then I connected the circle to that middle part, and then I just repeated the process. So I was able to make a teardrop shape, as you can see here. I wanted to make sure that I could secure the piece onto my table, so I used a clamp to do this, and I also made sure I wanted to kind of roughly draw out the shape of the profile of my spoon. That was also very important to me, and I always encourage you to draw out these shapes. The other thing I want to do is share that we have to be always carving with the grain, and these arrows are incredibly important for that as well. So these are the measurements for that, and I did draw a middle line just in case, because I thought maybe I wanted to cut that out. So I did want to show this process because I thought maybe this would be the best way to be cutting out the loop portion with the saw, is by doing it on its side. But as I quickly realized, this was incredibly hard to do at this angle, and so I switched it up and actually made it flat, and that made it a lot easier. But I would encourage you to kind of try out different things that make it a lot easier. I also realized you do not have to cut the middle out. I thought you did and it would be easier to do, but no, just cut out the sides. Save yourself some time. You just need to cut out the lines on the sides, and then eventually it will pop out. This is very labor intensive and does take a lot of time, so take your time with it, take a break. I did find it incredibly frustrating, and if you do have a hard tool, not a hard tool, but a faster tool to do it, you know what, to each its own. And if you don't even want to do this part, you don't have to. But it does turn out incredibly beautiful, so whatever you would like to do. But that is what it looks like in the end after I'm done cutting it with the saw. Next, we are going to be doing carving with our knife, and I do a push cut. And to do the push cut, you need to carve with your dominant hand and you push with your non-dominant thumb. Yes, it is incredibly annoying to carve like this, but it is, I promise you, the best way to carve. If you do not carve like this, you will not learn how to whittle. The other thing that you need to learn how to do is to know which way the grain is. Remember when I said to remember how to draw those lines? That is incredibly important. And as you can see, I had to switch the way that I am carving with the handle up because my lines are pointing towards that way. You really have to be careful of it. And the wood will tell you. The wood will be like, no, I don't want to carve this way. And it will be really resistant. And this is where, accidents happen, or you cut out too much wood, is when that happens. I also wanted to show you, I like to use my lap a lot. I'm not able to do that when I was on Zoom, so I'm glad I'm able to kind of like give you and share real life realities of how I carve. I like to put the pressure of, the handle on my lap and then I carve. But I am using my dominant hand to push the knife forward, and then I am, really getting in it. Now the last thing we're going to be doing is the handle, and this is a very large handle, so it did take me quite a while, but I do want to remember we do have months to do this. You do not have to do this in one sitting. I was just reiterating my lines again because I just wanted to make sure I knew exactly what I was carving. And this is really important if you have, a game plan to make sure that you know exactly what you're carving. So for me, I wanted to make sure that when I was carving the handle, I drew out everything beforehand. And this is just, we are designing and we're carving. So again, I'm using the push cut, and I am just going to be focusing on one section at a time because again, this is a very large handle. So with my dominant hand, I'm holding the knife, and with my non-dominant hand, I am pushing the knife. This is a technique called feathering, where you take really thin pieces of wood and you push it until you get this feathering technique, as you can see here. Very fabulous. And then you go the opposite way and you cut it all off. So you'll see me do that in a second. And this is a really great way if you want to remove a lot of material at once. I am trying to make my handle more cylindrical, so I'm slowly removing material using both the push cut and the feathering technique like I showed you, and following the lines and the guides that we drew. So just slowly do that and take your time as you do it, and make sure again that you are going with the grain, because the way that the grain works for this piece is the wood is vertical, so you want to be going up and down, and if you feel any resistance either way, just go the opposite way, and you'll definitely feel that when you're in the loop part of the piece. So I will come find you again at that portion. Let's start carving the inside part of the loop of our knife, and I use the very tip of my knife a lot of the times, and this is a really great way and great trick for getting inside of smaller kind of radiuses, I would say. I also use and carve the inside of the loop and make sure that my knife is really flat, as you can see here, because there is a divot right there, so I wanted to flatten that out. So I'm still doing the push cut, but I'm just making sure that that is all super even, and I am carving that so it is all a smooth tier all the way around. What I'm doing now is carving the outside of the loop so that it is rounded. And this is going to be end grain, which is incredibly hard. So end grain is the end of a tree, and you'll feel it. It sounds really high pitched as well, but it is really hard to carve, and so I'm always trying to go with the grain when I'm carving the end grain for my pieces. here is where I'm carving and trying to remove the corners of the loop of the handle. So I am using again the tip of my knife, and I am going in with the tip, and then I'm going around again to kind of like take that hard edge off. So I can feel resistance with my knife, so anytime I do that, I flip the piece over and I carve the opposite way. You'll see me do that in a second probably. You should be very aware of the resistance of the wood, and that generally means you are going against the grain. So I am doing something called a paring cut. Now this is pretty advanced. If you do not feel comfortable doing that, you do not have to. You can always sand this or use a shinto to do it. And as you can see throughout all of this, I'm going back and forth. So this is the last step before we do our sanding, and we're going to be using the shinto rasp. How the shinto rasp works is there's a fine side and a rough side, and you want to pull your project up against the teeth of the rougher side. And this is going to really help with shaping the end grain of the piece. Like I mentioned, it's really hard to carve, so if you want to not carve that, you can use a shinto rasp. It's one of my favorite tools to use for dealing with end grain, and I like it to use for the bottom and also the top, but it's a really great shaping tool. And I use the rougher side to really remove any material, and then I use the finer side right before I start sanding. So you can kind of see what it looks like here. Last steps that we're going to be doing is our sanding, and sanding is both tiresome and amazing because it really finishes the piece. And inside of that little glassland bag you'll find a band-aid if you haven't used it yet, 80 grit sandpaper, 150 grit sandpaper, and 220. It should have the numbers on the back, but if it doesn't, you can kind of tell by the roughness of it. Roughest being 80, finest being 220. So you're going to start with 80 grit, the roughest one, and you're going to bend it over hot dog style like you saw, and we're going to use our thumb to push down as we sand. And you're going to use 80 grit the most. And obviously I fast forwarded this so you don't have to watch me sand, but I am pushing down with my thumb. And sanding's really going to make a huge difference on if your piece looks really finished or not, and if you want that smoother kind of feel. If you want to look a little more rustic, that's up to you, but I always like to have my pieces really polished and finished, and so I take a lot of time sanding. But you can get really lost in this as well, so I really enjoy sanding, especially when you see a bump and you're like, oh, I need to get this one bump out, and you just hyper focus on that and you can really get it out. I do recommend, we obviously give you guys sandpaper every time we do a project, but I do recommend you guys get sandpaper on top of what we give you, because sometimes you want to do more than what we obviously offer. 80 grit the most, and then you move on to 150 and then 220. So that is what it looks like after at least 80 grit. Next, what we're going to be doing is 150, and just make sure you go over everything. So you really want to make sure that you are going over every part of your piece, and I have a little brush to make sure that I get all the excess dust, especially when I'm sanding. And this is a great time to wear a mask, but that's what it looks like after it's done. It's so beautiful. I'm really happy with how it turned out. This is one of, honestly, the most beautiful projects I think I've made in a long time, so I'm so excited to see what you guys make. The last thing we're going to be doing is putting wood butter on our piece, and this is a mixture we make in-house at the studio, and it is beeswax and mineral oil. I use a microfiber cloth, but you can use whatever you have at home, like an extra t-shirt or anything. I like to say less is more, so I get a little dollop like that size and I massage it into the cloth, and then I put it onto the piece. Make sure the piece doesn't have a ton of dust or excess sanding, stuff on it, and then you just rub it into your piece, and as you can see, the color of the wood naturally comes out. And the reason why we even put wood butter on our pieces is because it will condition our piece and it will also protect our piece. So this is food safe. It is capable of using when we're cooking, so when we are using our amazing cooking spoons, we can feel safe about using it. I recommend doing it every few months. Thank you so much for being a part of Mel's Carving Club and for making our very first project, the loop spoon. I hope you tag us with your finished piece on Mel's Carving Club on Instagram, and I will see you for the next one. See you on the MCC Hub. Until then, bye everyone.